Welcome to Novara Live. As you can see, once again, we're back at home. I put a nice green plant in front of the living room door to try and make it look a bit nicer, but it doesn't match up to the studio, does it? You've probably guessed why we aren't in the studio. As I said a couple of weeks ago when we had that last heat wave, we don't yet have air conditioning. It averages about 4 degrees hotter in the studio than it is outside, which would mean today would be about 36 degrees, which is too hot for our streaming kit, also a little bit too hot for my brain to function. We are, though, because obviously it's going to be hot all week, so we might be doing a few shows from home. We are going to try and not let this crisis go to waste. We're going to be focusing a lot on climate change. I have some brilliant guests lined up for the rest of the week. George Monbiot, Zach Polanski, Naomi Klein should all be coming on. Part of the idea is to model how we think really the mainstream media should be responding to extreme weather, which is instead of sort of either ignoring it or sending someone to film on the beach, talk about the climate crisis that this is so clearly a part of. For now, though, well, I don't want to say, after that little speech, I don't want to say more important news, but I would have done if I didn't feel bad. I'm joined by Ash Sarkar, and I have to ask you, what did you think of the football?
Michael, you know me so well. I genuinely think that was one of the most exciting England matches ever. And there was the context of it, right? The knockout stages of the World Cup. Obviously, it's a very big deal. But the Azteca is just such a iconic stadium. So it's up there with like Wembley and the Maracana. It's the sort of place where you go, anything that goes down in there is just like hugely significant. It's also become something of a fortress for the Mexican national team. The crowd are always red hot. So I was excited. I was also one of those people who was a bit snooty about Tuchel's team selection, right? Just a little bit. So, you know, when Dan Burns got the call up, I was like, what are you doing? And then it turns out you needed Dan Burns and his massive head to block every cross coming into the box for about 20 minutes. So turns out that the world famous football manager might know something about team selection that I don't.
There's an amazing clip going viral on the moment of the Mexican tries to do a sort of bicycle kick to score a goal. It goes straight into Dan Burns' forehead and goes all the way into the Mexican half. Like it's the furthest blocking header I've ever seen it go. Such an exciting match. Incredible. Ash, did you stay up for it or did you watch it in the morning?
Actually, a bit of both. So I woke up at 1 to watch it, and then I saw that kickoff had been delayed by an hour. Michael, I'm not a young woman anymore. All right, time was I'd be out till 4 or 5 in the morning, then into work, or even when I was younger, a lecture the next day. Now I need 3 to 5 business days notice if I'm going to stand up too quickly. So I thought that would be pushing it a bit late. I wouldn't be able to join you on the show today. So I went back to bed and then I woke up in the morning and watched the match then. And it was great. It meant that I had like the whole roller coaster of emotions before 8:30.
I'm going to problematize the age-based analysis there because I went to the pub with my dad, who's in his early 70s. When the game got delayed by an hour, I actually decided to go home. So I had sort of a half-hour nap. Then I did watch it live. My dad was in the pub till 5 a.m. So, you know, age ain't nothing but a number. That's not
Maybe it comes back. Maybe it comes back, you know. So there's a sort of upside down bell curve situation going on.
I want to start. We are going to talk about lots of very important political issues today, but we did have to start with the football. And I also want to start with a lovely video, which I saw today, going to the other end of the age spectrum. So these are a bunch of school kids who were told not to stay up to watch the match, come into school, and they'll watch it sort of replayed with no spoilers. Take a look.
Mr. Referee, please have mercy.
What's going on? I mean, just in case anyone's wondering, we genuinely do not know the final
Another
score.
corner. Here it comes. Oh! Jordan Pickford, what a punch. Look at, yes! Yes! Oh my God! We've won! Guys! I literally can't believe it! Right! How are you? We've won! Are you okay?
Yes. We
Well, one that reminded me of, I remember watching the Brazil-England quarterfinal at my primary school in 2002. And it's like, I love those memories of being like a kid watching the World Cup, but then also how much more excited the BBC presenter was than the girl she first started talking to. The girl was like, yeah, good. And she's like, good. Oh my God. But brilliant. I love it. Looking forward to next Saturday. Going to be gorgeous. But as I say, let's move on to some important issues. Although actually we are going to come back to football, but we're going to come at it from a more political corruption angle, as opposed to sort of us attempting any analysis of Thomas Tuchel's substitutions. We will also, on tonight's show, be discussing Nigel Farage's donor, who is a convicted criminal. Very interesting story from the Times, sort of more bad news for Nigel Farage. We'll take a look at that. First, though, the weather. So I'm not going to give you a weather forecast. I'm going to explain why this is not normal. So I was sort of looking up stats over the weekend. Sort of when I looked at that weather forecast, it said we've got 6 days this week that are going to be over 30 degrees. I was like, am I just sort of misremembering the past and it was normally like this and I'm being sort of, overly shocked by what I'm seeing? And no, this is not normal. So some statistics. Between 1993 and 2013, London experienced an average of 2.8 days over 30 degrees each year. So every year you would have on average 2.8 days over 30, under 3 days a year. Between 2014 and 2023, so sort of the last decade or so, it reached 6 days a year over 30 degrees. So in 365 days, the whole year, you'd have 6 days over 30 degrees. So what about this year? Well, including today, we've already had 13 days over 30 degrees, so double the last decade. And if the weather forecast for this week is correct, the next 6 days are also going to be over 30 degrees, meaning we will have had 19 days over 30 degrees in London this year by this weekend, and it's not even mid-July. It will also come as no surprise to you that June was the hottest month in England on record. It has surpassed the previous record set in 2025. So yeah, all the hottest summers are basically in the last 10 years, and they keep getting hotter. It was a full 3 degrees hotter than the historical average. This year also saw the hottest day in May on record. Of course, that was 34.8 degrees recorded on the 25th of May, which beat the previous May record by a full 2 degrees. We do have some more stats for you coming up, but Ash, I suppose that looking up those over the weekend, it did just really hit home how abnormal this is. And also how, maybe it's because the World Cup is going on and, I'm all in favour of people enjoying the football instead of obsessing over incoming sort of potential catastrophes for the mental health of everyone. But it does seem like this should be a bigger story. Like one of the big debates we've had over the past month is whether or not Ed Miliband could become Chancellor, given he doesn't want to open new oil and gas fields. And literally we are seeing the climate crisis out of our windows. Everyone is sweating. No one can really do any work because we don't have aircon yet. It does seem like I would have hoped there would be a bigger impact.
Well, I suppose the first thing to point out is that an awful lot of money has gone into framing the conversation around climate and net zero. So millions and millions, if not billions of dollars have been poured in worldwide by the fossil fuel industry, their various lobbyists, to try and make sure that people never feel that the issue of the climate crisis is quite as urgent as it ought to be. Now, there have been ways in which that's sort of been through tweaks and nudges, so encouraging people to think about it through the frame of personal consumption rather than systems and what it is that states can do. But there's also this sort of air war that's going on in the media by which you frame it as you've got like hippie, bleeding heart greenies on one side who care more about the rest of the world than they care about you. And then you've got, okay, well, we've got to put our domestic agenda first, energy sovereignty first, this, that, and the other. Actually, there isn't a conflict between climate mitigation and domestic energy sovereignty, right? We have to import natural gas. We have to import most of our oil. We don't have to do that for solar and for wind, but that tells you something about how this has been a debate that's been framed with a particular purpose. The second point that I suppose I would like to make is that if I think that there's been an error on the part of both, I guess, the climate movement and its political arm, which is the push for net zero, is that I think there's maybe been a bit too much emphasis on mitigation and emissions from the UK over and above resilience and adaptation. And the reason why that's important is because obviously UK CO2 emissions have gone down, right, quite substantively. And when you see emissions going down, but obviously, global emissions keep on going up, and also you have the particular issue in the UK of, we've got a lot more electricity being generated by wind and solar, to a lesser extent hydro as well, and energy prices aren't coming down for the consumer, then it warms people up, it massages them for like an anti-net zero message, right? Or we've been doing this thing for years that you've told us to do, and it's not making me any better off. Now, I would say the approach to that is, well, you have to bring in energy and along with other utilities into national ownership, right? Like these shouldn't be enterprises for private profit. You want them in the control of the state. The national grid is a natural monopoly. And what you want to do is also have the cost of electricity, the cost of energy, not being set by the price of gas so much. That's how you make people feel the benefit of we're decarbonising our energy grid. The savings are passed on to you. But there needed to be more about how do you adapt to the existing housing stock, right? How do you make existing offices and homes cooler? What are the design principles that need to be embedded at every step of new construction so that cooling and insulation is absolutely at the heart of it? And also, when you think about different parts of the country which are particularly vulnerable to flooding, like you'd want that to be front and center. So we're doing something for the resilience of our country. And the last point that I'd want to make is this, which is we do these audience surveys quite a bit, Michael, as you well know. And one of the things that our audience often tells us is we want more climate coverage. Now, we can see through the back end, both in terms of our YouTube and also our website, that climate content is often what we struggle to get people to engage with, whether it's reading it, whether it's watching it, whether it's sharing it. And I think that there is something about this story and the way in which it's been depersonalized. So it's about systems. It's literally atmospheric. It's about the climate. It sort of feels ambient in that way, is that it doesn't have that clear sense of agency, right? Here's a person or here's a company and this is what they're doing, that gets people hooked into a story. And I think that people feel every time that there's an article that they know what's going to be in there. Right. The thing about climate story is that in some way it's always the same story. So I do think that there is an onus on us as journalists to work out how do you tell this story in a way that people want to engage with. And I think that we have experimented with it, right? So we did it with the Committed series, which was about climate protesters who are behind bars. There was a story that I wrote a couple of years ago, which was like a whodunit about these sort of hoax, but also kind of true climate papers that had been left around London that got shared quite a bit. We're trying to tell this story in a way that people want to engage with, but it's not easy.
Yeah, I'm going to give a shout out to a gentleman called Simon Clark, who does climate videos that do extremely well. I emailed him this week, actually, because I was going to try get him on this week. He's away, but he said he'd be up for coming on in the summer. And I mean, for me, partly why I find his ones engaging is because they're quite solutions focused. So if I'm just watching a video telling me how bad climate is, I struggle. But if I'm watching a video where they're saying, and these are the kind of things that could move us in the right direction, I find it much more engaging. To that end, I'm going to show you a bunch of charts showing you how bad everything is. There is going to be some good news at the end of it. Well, not good news, but sort of some hope at the end of it. These are a bunch of charts that were all from a Bloomberg article today, a very interesting one. So this is June's heat wave across Western Europe, which you won't be surprised to know was the most severe ever. On June the 24th this year, so that was the peak of it, huge parts of Europe had temperatures over 10 degrees higher than the average for that day between 1981 and 2010. So obviously this is not 10% higher average temperatures throughout the year, which would mean sort of absolute catastrophe and we'd all die. But sort of for this particular day, and there's obviously lots of variations on particular days. So for this particular day, it was 10 degrees higher than it has been on that particular day in previous years. Paris was a full 15 degrees hotter than the average temperature for that date. The Yamal Peninsula in Russia was 16.5 degrees hotter than the average, and that looks like it's in the Arctic Circle, which is always very worrying, because if that all melts and collapses, we are in trouble. Also, more bad news, global warming is speeding up. So between 1970 and 2010, global temperatures increased about 0.7 degrees over 40 years, a rate of roughly 0.17 degrees per decade. But between 2010 and 2026, global temperatures increased about 0.5 degrees over just 15 years. So that's a rate of roughly 0.3 degrees per decade. So the rate of change in the last decade appears to have around doubled, which is not good news. Now to potentially where the solutions might come from. So as recently as a decade ago, the green transition looked incredibly daunting, as every form of renewable energy was much more expensive than coal and gas. I'm not sure hydro might have been cheaper, but that only works in certain scenarios. You need obviously a river or such like. That's no longer the case. The price of solar energy has declined by 90% since 2010. Onshore wind is 70% cheaper. Offshore wind is still more expensive than the onshore version, but it's declined in price by 59%. And the recent move in the price of battery storage is maybe the most exciting. So they fell in price by 30% in 2025 alone. So in a single year, the price of battery storage fell by 30%. Now, obviously, why battery storage is so important is because while solar and wind are cheap when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, there are obviously moments when those things aren't happening. And that's when we have to turn on the gas power plants, because the gas power plants can provide us energy whenever demand is high and whenever we want it. Just like the gas. I'm no engineer, but something along those lines. I think you do just turn the gas on, a bit like a hob. But if we have cheap battery storage, that means that we can solve the intermittency problem of solar and wind without using fossil fuels. So very, very exciting. I suppose, Ash, I want to know what you think, because I suppose there's two directions that one can go in when it comes to climate and sort of how do you get people's attention. One is to sort of make it about good guys and bad guys. This is a climate justice issue. These are the people, it's the people in the private jets who are screwing us all over. The other is to say this is an engineering problem. Obviously, it's going to take political will, and we have to face down vested interests in the fossil fuel sector. But ultimately, this is a story about sort of states doing productive things which can benefit all of us while tackling the climate challenge. There's a bit more the way sort of we talked about COVID. It's this pandemic. We have to pull together and get through this, as opposed to the good guys have to beat the bad guys. I think there's arguments for both. I wonder where you come from on this.
I mean, reflecting on our own COVID coverage, Michael, I actually think we did more of the former than we did the latter. Now, I know that you were much more optimistic, because I remember some of these editorial discussions at the time about vaccine efficacy and being able to open up. And ultimately, I think you were proved right in many of those discussions. But I remember how our coverage felt at that time. And I remember the kind of connection that we were fostering with our audience. Really, the story we were telling was one of state incompetence, state, self-interest. So particularly when we were thinking about, the contracts for your mates and lobbying and all that kind of thing. And in some cases, state abandonment, right? The protective ring thrown around care homes. So actually, I think for us, that was a real good guys versus bad guys story in a moment where people were feeling immensely precarious, right? Lockdown was obviously just such a huge psychological shock for most people. And we were the ones saying, here's how you make sense of it politically. So yes, there was a sort of everyone pulling together element, but that actually came later in the story of COVID for us. The first thing I think was actually good guys and bad guys. I'm not saying that we don't tell it as an engineering story. I think that there is an audience out there who would find that really interesting, and those things would go really far. And I think that fundamentally, the thing that we need to do is tell stories that are intellectually nourishing for our audience, that make them feel a sense of political possibility because they understand the world that bit better. But I don't think there's any substitute for making someone feel a bit surprised. And it's a fine line to walk. And I realize this has turned into more of an editorial discussion than a climate discussion, but look, if you guys want to see how the sausage gets made, here's how it fucking gets made, is that you have to deal with this tension, which is the story has to be familiar enough that someone isn't going to feel dumb when they click on it, but also surprises them or has the capacity to surprise them so it holds their attention. And I think those two things are particularly difficult with the climate.
Well, as I say, later in the week, we're going to have some brilliant storytellers on who have, I think it's fair to say, fought a lot more than me and Ash about how to actually communicate the gravity of climate change and what can be done about it. I mean, some of the best in the world, really. Naomi Klein, George Monbiot, and hopefully we'll get Zach Polanski on as well. So you can look forward to that. For now, let's go back to football. While the weather is not normal this year, neither is this year's World Cup. The oddities, of course, began with the President of the United States getting a made-up FIFA World Peace Prize in December. But the outrages have mounted as the fawning by FIFA presidents, that's Gianni Infantino, over Donald Trump, haven't just affected or haven't just made FIFA look ridiculous, let's say. They've actually affected what happens on the pitch. This is what's really driven everyone mad. So the first major footballing injustice concerned a Somali referee who was scheduled to referee at a number of matches at the World Cup, but whose visa was denied. FIFA didn't do anything to stand up to Donald Trump. The next victims of Donald Trump's avarice were the Iranian football team, who were only allowed to fly to their matches the night before games and had to leave immediately afterwards. They didn't get to do a cool down. That put them at a severe disadvantage. Again, FIFA did nothing. But the latest example of Trump putting his thumbs on the footballing scale has caused an even bigger outrage. This is Folarin Balogun. He's been the United States' top scorer at this World Cup. But the US's last 32 match against Bosnia, or at that match, Balogun got a red card by FIFA's own rules. They're very long-standing rules. They've been around for a while. They're very well understood by fans. That means that Balogun must miss his next game. So you get sent off for one game and then you're suspended for the following game. Now, that following game would be tonight's last 16 match against Belgium. But Donald Trump had other ideas. He wanted him to play. So he called Gianni Infantino, asked for the suspension to be overturned, and he got his way. So Gianni Infantino answered the call, said, oh yeah, maybe, it seems like maybe we can overturn it. Maybe we can change the rules for you. The ban has been lifted. He can play this evening. Trump celebrated on Truth Social, so he's never very subtle. He said, thank you, FIFA, for doing what was right and reversing a great injustice. President Donald J. Trump. Now, all the papers have reported that the decision followed a call from Donald Trump to Infantino, so this isn't just speculation. This is confirmed. And the response has been very strong. So this was the response from UEFA. So UEFA is the European Football Association. They said, yesterday's decision to suspend for a probationary period of a year the implementation of the one-match automatic suspension following the red card issued to player Folarin Balogun crossed a red line. Football, like any other sport, relies on rules, which are the basis for fair, honest and transparent competition. Sometimes rules are open to interpretation. In this case, not. A minimum automatic suspension of one match following a red card is not a discretionary option. We express our disbelief at such an unprecedented, incomprehensible and unjustifiable decision. So that's from one football association to another. The England manager, Thomas Tuchel, is also unimpressed.
Could Harry maybe ask Donald Trump?
Where does this start and where does this end now? Can we overturn it or not overturn it, or
what is that something that
what is going on?
We'll seek to pursue, because, like you say, there's surely a chance. Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, where to draw the line is the question that I ask. I have no answer to that. Where does this end now? Do we appeal if a yellow card is not a yellow card? Do we think it's not a red card, or who thinks it? Where does this start and where does this end? Is my question. I don't have an answer.
Could Harry maybe ask Donald Trump to?
Maybe, yeah. That's a good starting point.
Tuchel always seems very calm, somewhat reassuring when the England manager seems calm, level-headed fella. Gary Neville, I suppose, seemed a little bit more heated.
It absolutely stinks, let's be really clear. But what I would say is the thing that stinks the most is there should be a review process in place, because I actually didn't think it was a red card, and I think there should be a process which allows it to be overturned. But if there's no process for it to be overturned, and then somehow FIFA from nowhere have just decided to basically let a player play, and the rules are the same for everybody, I would be absolutely raging if I was Belgium and every other team in the tournament that's had a player sent off that might think it's a little bit hard done to. And do you know something, Mark? Are we surprised? No, not with this lot.
No.
Even the former head of FIFA, who himself resigned after a corruption scandal involving how Qatar and Russia got their respective World Cups, he thinks this is a step too fast. This is a tweet from Sepp Blatter. Red cards are not overturned by political phone calls. They are overturned by rules, evidence, and independent bodies. If a US president intervenes with the FIFA president and a player is suddenly cleared before a World Cup knockout match, the question is unavoidable. Quo vadis, FIFA? Football must never become a playground for political power. Ash, Gianni Infantino he's too corrupt even for Sepp Blatter.
For Sepp Blatter.
Sepp Blatter denies any allegations of corruption, I'm sure, but his reputation is not untarnished, just for legal reasons there. Ash.
I mean, so look, I would say that for FIFA, this is plumbing new depths rather than opening up a brand new frontier. And I am going to talk a little bit about the history of FIFA. But to just talk about this overturning of the red card or the sort of suspension of the one match ban for a period of a year, which is completely ridiculous, is that harsh reds. And I did think that it was a harsh red for Balogun. I didn't think that, I think that you would have grounds to feel hard done by, but harsh reds are a part of the game, right? They are a part of the game. I thought that the penalty that was awarded to Mexico for Harry Kane making contact in the box was an absurdly soft pen. So would that mean that Keir Starmer would be able to ring up FIFA after the match was done and was like, okay, no, you actually have to disallow that goal, even though this was a call that was made by the ref and by VAR, right? I'm going to go over your head. Because then it basically means that any on-the-pitch call is completely meaningless. And I do think that it's really quite revealing that FIFA haven't offered any kind of explanation, right? With VAR, you have to offer an explanation. With on-the-pitch calls, the ref now has to give an explanation for why he's reached the conclusion that he has. And you can disagree with it. You could say, oh, that's really harsh. You could talk about, oh, that's not a handball. The arm wasn't in an unnatural position or whatever. But it's on the pitch and someone has to give their reasoning. So I think the fact that FIFA hasn't given their reasoning, I think speaks absolute volumes about what has gone on. And I know that there are going to be people who say that, well, preferential treatment is also part of, top flight football, whether it's at the club level or at the international level. And that's true, right? There's a reason why Harry Kane dives like a beautiful Olympic swimmer. It's because there is such a thing as preferential treatment. But there is such a huge difference between that being part of on the pitch decision making and that being taken outside of it into FIFA governance itself, and it becomes something which politicians can interfere in. And this is a really big deal. I know that we're going to talk a bit about Ronaldo and some of the decisions that were made by FIFA in the lead up to this World Cup. But the last time a World Cup red was overturned using Article 27 was 1962. So it is an astonishingly rare occurrence. And then when you go back and you look at all the other kinds of interference by Donald Trump in the match, in the sort of playing of the football itself, whether it's through the Iranian team or the imposition of hydration breaks. So basically American corporations can get their commercials on, changing it from a game of two quarters to two halves, to a game of 4 quarters. I mean, it just shows how disgustingly servile Gianni Infantino and FIFA have been in the face of American power. And we've talked about the FIFA Peace Prize, which was basically Donald Trump, here is something to make up for you never getting a Nobel Prize, and here is a sort of shiny bauble for you so that you don't interfere with like the Iranian team being able to travel or whatever. That wasn't enough. The other thing, which I actually think is in some ways a bigger scandal, because I don't really have a problem with FIFA offering Trump a bauble. Do you know what I mean? Like, here is a special participation trophy for you, Mr. President. FIFA opened up an office in Trump Tower in Manhattan, which was basically unused. So it was just a way for FIFA to funnel money directly into the Trump family coffers, which I think is completely disgusting. And then you can talk about the World Cup draw. FIFA originally was going to host it in one location, then moved it to the Kennedy Center after Trump suggested it. So moved from Las Vegas to the Kennedy Center. And then they played the YMCA by the Village People. I think they actually got the Village People to come and perform YMCA at the draw specifically for Donald Trump. You know, like, here's your theme music, Mr. President. So this whole thing has been completely embarrassing. There has been no attempt to say there is such a thing as fair competition, and the rules of fair competition will be in place even in the face of American power. There has just been sort of fold after fold after fold in the face of what it is that Donald Trump wants, in a way which is absolutely a new low for FIFA. It's not brand new, but it is a new low.
You mentioned Article 27 there. So that is so FIFA justify, as you said, they didn't justify why in this particular instance this red card or this suspension or this ban should be suspended. But they did say, look at this part of our constitution which says we can do this, or our rule book. And it's Article 27, which basically says FIFA can decide whatever they want. Basically, it said FIFA can decide whatever they want about any ban at any point. It's a bit like, you know, when you go into any sort of eating establishment or bar, they say, like, we reserve the right to kick people out for whatever reason we want. It's like the organisation says, well, we've reserved the right to do anything. So here we are doing anything. We've reserved the right to make arbitrary decisions. You mentioned Cristiano Ronaldo. So he's come up a lot sort of during this controversy because he is another player who FIFA seemed to make exceptions for. So in the qualifiers for the World Cup, Ronaldo got a red card. I think he was playing Ireland, which this particular one should have seen him miss 3 games. 2 of those matches would be at the World Cup finals. However, in November last year, that ban was also overturned. Now, when I'd initially seen this, I thought, okay, so maybe this isn't so much a politics story. Maybe this is just FIFA changed the rules for high-profile players, essentially for TV rights, right? There'll be people who aren't really football fans, but they want to see the famous people. And FIFA think that if you have a World Cup where some of the biggest stars aren't able to play, that would damage the World Cup brand. And so they say, well, it's not quite fair, but, you know, we don't want the World Cup without a big player. However, it turns out that there is a political connection here as well. Because guess who Cristiano Ronaldo visited 3 days before that unprecedented decision by FIFA? Yes, that's right, Donald J. Trump. So here Cristiano Ronaldo is in the White House with Donald J. Trump. They're having a great time. Ronaldo was visiting the White House for a state dinner for Mohammed bin Salman, so the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And can you guess who else was in attendance? That's right. You can see here, standing in between Elon Musk and David Sachs at the back. It's a selfie taken by Cristiano Ronaldo. It's Gianni Infantino. So Ash, this doesn't seem like the first time that Donald Trump has been able to say, can't you just sort something out for this guy? I like him.
The best way to understand Donald Trump's America is that everything is wrestling. Everything is WWE. Everything is sports entertainment, because there's no real love of the game, right? It's about the spectacle. And I think that's why Ronaldo gets this preferential treatment of not having to serve out a 3-match ban for violent conduct. He threw an elbow up at a Republic of Ireland player, I believe it was. So that is a straight red. That is violent conduct. That is missing 3 matches. I've had to like it and lump it when it's players who I rate who've had to serve a 3-match ban, right? And that's, again, part of the game. Managing your yellows, not getting a red, not straying into violent conduct or dangerous play, that is part of the game of football. But the way in which Donald Trump sees it, and I think the way in which an increasing number of Americans see it, is that it is like wrestling in that you always want to see The Rock at WrestleMania. It doesn't really matter how old he is. You'd always rather see The Rock than not see The Rock, because it's not actually about, is this someone at the peak of their athletic performance? All right. As good as Messi is, as good as some of his performances have been for Argentina this World Cup, as good as Ronaldo is, and as good as some of his performances have been, but actually less good, they're clearly not at their best, but they're the GOATs, right? The greatest of all time. So it's like Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Michael Jordan. They are these names which have become bigger than the sport. They are a spectacle. So like Hulk Hogan, or like The Rock, Trump says, well, of course I want to see these guys. They're the best guys because they're the biggest names. They're obviously not the best footballers, but they are the biggest names. And this deep down is why I didn't think that the United States of America should host a World Cup. It's not just because you have to stay up late to watch matches, although I do also resent that. I think it's because their sports culture is fundamentally irreconcilable with ours. They are sports entertainment. They are wrestling. They are a World Series which doesn't involve players from any other countries, and that's who they are. They don't actually have a tradition of international competition in the same way. So you take something like basketball in the NBA, when are they playing other countries apart from, Canada? It's during the Olympics. And, that's not really a huge deal. It's not like the World Cup, right? Like the dream team participating in the Olympics is not as big as winning a World Cup for your country, right? Gridiron football, aka American football, doesn't have a tradition of international competition in the same way. So I know that for lots of people, it's about ice, and for lots of people, it's about the politics. And I do have objections to that too. But I do just think that Americans, they don't have any love of the game. All right. And they do great stuff. All right. I love the fact that the Super Bowl is mostly a Beyonce concert. I think that's fab. I love watching WWE. Stick to what you're good at and fuck off from football. We don't want you. We don't need you.
I mean, FIFA do have such a good thing going for themselves because they have a monopoly over the World Cup. They're like a private organization based in Switzerland, which is one of the reasons they're so untransparent. So as far as I understand, the reason it's been able to continue as so corrupt is because each country gets one vote, and it's quite easy to basically bribe the smaller countries. Yeah. At least, not necessarily cash in envelopes, but maybe by investment or whatever. And the same thing happens every World Cup, which is people are complaining about FIFA before the World Cup and sort of say, oh, they've ruined the World Cup, yada, yada, yada. And the World Cup happens, and obviously the World Cup is going to be amazing because the World Cups are always amazing. So it's like you can mismanage your organization so badly. You can be so openly corrupt, but you happen to have one of the best products in the world that literally just cannot fail. And it's like it is like a golden goose. However much they abuse it, it's still going to lay golden eggs.
I mean, and this is where the history of FIFA is really important, because the single most important figure in the history of FIFA's development is João de Havilland. So João de Havilland was the person who turned FIFA into the kind of big money entity that we recognize today. And the way in which he did it was all in the name of bringing the game to poorer countries. And it is absolutely true that FIFA becoming this much more global entity has sort of brought football infrastructure and sort of been able to celebrate the national game and footballing heritage of many, many countries in the global south. And that's been a good thing. I think that the South Africa World Cup was actually a really big turnaround for being able to better integrate African football into the sort of global pyramid of competition. And you're really seeing that with the quality of players that come from the continent of Africa today, right? That's why the quality of football has been so sick, because the infrastructure has been built to be able to identify those incredible players who are always there. But João de Havilland also had to resign because of corruption. Right, he had to step down as honorary president of FIFA in 2013 because it'd been found that he'd just been taking loads of bribes. And so at the time when he was taking bribes, it wasn't a crime, but it was obviously crooked. Do you know what I mean? Something can be crooked without being a crime. And then you've got, Sepp Blatter, you've got Platini, and all of these figures who were, they had their reputations affected by the 2015 corruption scandal, which is the one that you're talking about, in which 14 individuals were indicted on a range of charges, from wire fraud to bribery and all this kind of thing. And 9 people, including FIFA executives, accepted guilty pleas. Now, Sepp Blatter, I have to say, was not one of them. I don't think that Platini was either. So, don't sue me. I've said that you also deny all wrongdoing, etc., etc. But that has been the direction of travel for FIFA. It seems to only become, more and more mired in this kind of corruption scandal. And then Trump just attached turbo boosters onto it. And I do think that sometimes, though, they do try and push football fans too far. I mean, you said, like, it's an amazing product, and it is, right? Like, the quality of football has been incredible. I also think that the expansion, so that there were more teams playing in this one, was a good idea. You know, I think World Cup should be a true World Cup. Let every fucking country on the, planet play. Let it last, months and months and months, and, give us all time off for it. I thought that was actually a good thing. But I think that when they tried to do the European Super League, when big teams, Real Madrid, PSG, Barcelona, Spurs, for some reason, all tried to get together and say, we're going to have this sort of alternative to the Champions League, which again is more sports entertainment because it's the big names, regardless of actually how well those clubs are doing. The fans pushed back. So I do think that there is a certain kind of corruption which people find disgusting and distasteful, but it doesn't offend almost like the spirit of fair play in the same way, right? So like, the bribery scandals and stuff like that, it's like, okay, well, still going to watch the World Cup. But when you're interfering with the game itself, that's the point where football fans go, absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, if this guy scores like the winning goal against Belgium, there's going to be havoc. There's going to be hell to pay. It'll be an exciting match.
Yeah, it's like, how good is the Belgian army? Do you think they can mount a land invasion of the United States or not?
I suppose that's the issue, isn't it? Donald Trump knows he's got the ultimate backup, which is the American military. So maybe that's why he's so confident doing this kind of thing. Another day, another accusation against Nigel Farage. And like most accusations against the Reform UK leader, it involves fairly large sums of money. So a Sunday Times investigation has claimed the Reform leader accepted freebies from aristocratic convicted fraudster George Cottrell and failed to declare them. Now, according to the Times, Cottrell's generosity included funding Farage's back office, private security, staff, transport and accommodation. The Times also say that 32-year-old Cottrell personally recruited and paid free staff to haul over Farage's social media presence. That's a lot of support. And it claims Farage used a property rented by Cottrell near Buckingham Palace. Now, here's a key point about the code of conduct for MPs, as explained in this extract from the Sunday Times story. So they say, the code of conduct says MPs must disclose any benefit which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their actions or words on their register of interests. Its overall aim is to protect democracy by upholding the highest levels of transparency. It says MPs must declare any gifts, benefits and hospitality received in the year preceding their election and which relate in any way to their political activities. And the exception is purely personal gifts, such as presents from family. Even then, the code says both the possible motive of the giver and the use of the gift should be considered, clarifying if there is any doubt, the benefit should be registered. And so this is crucial. The Times is saying that Cottrell made many of these donations to Farage during the crucial 12-month period running up to his election as MP for Clacton in July 2024. However, after getting elected, Farage only made a single disclosure relating to Cottrell's support, which was a payment of 9,200 quid to attend a conference in Belgium. So all that other stuff we just told you about, none of that appeared in that register. Farage, as you'll know, is already under a bit of a cloud when it comes to money and donations. I mean, he is already under an investigation by the Standards Watchdog in Parliament over whether he should have declared a £5 million donation from cryptocurrency billionaire Christopher Harborn. Let's just remind ourselves how Farage coped with scrutiny over that one.
People inherit vast sums of money and all sorts of things happen in life.
He's not your dad. You didn't inherit it.
People inherit money.
He's a crypto billionaire living on the other side of the planet, and he gave you. But again, you talked about. You said this is an unconditional gift. Yeah. Is it a gift, a reward, or is it for your security? Because
no, it's an unconditional gift. I can spend it on Ferraris if I wish to. All right. So
are you spending it on Ferraris, or are you spending it on your security?
It's none of your business.
So that was Farage speaking to Julia Hartley-Brewer, who was on loads of TV shows that day, and on each of them he looked incredibly shifty. He was telling the BBC, it's none of your business what this money was spent on, this £5 million that I got just before an election. Similarly on LBC. He looked as shifty as he has ever looked, and we haven't really seen anything of him since. Back to this latest development. So this story from the Sunday Times over the weekend. So concerning Cottrell, he is an interesting guy. And the Sunday Times have put out a little podcast series about him as well. I listened to episode 1 and it is very interesting. So his nickname is Posh George. He was forced to leave the public school, apparently a very fancy one, Malvern College before his A-levels due to a gambling addiction. Now, according to the Times, when at the school, he was even found to have walked to a betting shop with 50 grand in cash. Now, of course, all my sympathies to people who end up with gambling addictions. It's a very exploitative industry. Of course, not everyone's sort of with a gambling addiction ends up getting expelled from one of the poshest private schools in the country after going to a betting shop with 50 grand in cash. So it's slightly different to your average situation here. The paper reports that he later became a, quote, fixer-cum financier to the ultra-rich in Mayfair before moving into crypto and online gambling businesses. And so one of his businesses, you can gamble in crypto. So combining the two most sort of sinister, pointless industries in the world today. I mean, pointless in the sense that they don't really add any social value. Crypto is gambling. Gambling is obviously gambling. Now, at the age of just 22, Cottrell, who it has been reported calls Farage Daddy. And this was only briefly mentioned. I still haven't really understood why he calls Farage Daddy. He was made head of financing for UKIP. Now, UKIP, obviously, one of the forerunners to reform. So at just 22, he got that job. And this is where it gets very, very interesting. So in 2014, Cottrell offered to help some American drug dealers launder the proceeds of crime into Bitcoin, as you do. The dealers, though, turned out to be undercover federal agents. And he was arrested in 2016 while on a trip to the US. And this bit's a really great detail because Farage was with Cottrell when he was arrested at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. So Farage was actually there for a speech with Donald Trump. I think it was the trip. You've probably seen it before where sort of Donald Trump is saying how amazing Brexit was. Farage comes up and sort of, says you should also have a revolution in America. Apparently when Cottrell was arrested, many people thought that the police were maybe there for Farage, and it turned out they were there for his pal. Farage later said he couldn't be held responsible for what everyone around him does. Facing up to 20 years in prison, because it's quite a serious crime, Cottrell made a plea deal and served just 8 months for wire fraud. You can see his prison mugshot here. So that's Posh George, probably a low point. Now, according to the Times, he told the police that he hadn't intended to launder the money. He was just going to steal it from the drug dealers. Now, if he was just, that would be a very dangerous thing to do. So if the question here is about judgment, the judgment of the people around Nigel Farage, I'm not sure which displays poorer judgment, trying to help drug dealers launder money, and it turns out that they are federal agents, or trying to steal money off drug dealers. I don't think that normally ends very well from the gangster movies I've seen. It's worth pointing out that Cottrell's dodgy dealings and close association with Farage have been reported for years. So some of this isn't actually new. They're just sort of embellishing sort of with detail. Investigative journalist Carol Cadwallader is one notable example of someone who has been on the story for almost a decade. What is new, as well as sort of some of the texture of the story, because they've interviewed lots of people around Cottrell and Farage, is the alleged donations ahead of Farage's election to Parliament. Reform, as you would imagine, has already started to circle the wagon. So the defence so far is that Cottrell was, quote, an old friend, and that donations were given, quote, in a personal capacity to Farage before he was an MP. Robert Jenrick, former Conservative MP, now Reform MP, a man with very little shame, was on the weekend thrown out onto the media to, I suppose, show that he's capable of defending anything. It went about as well as you'd expect. Here he is on Sky News with Trevor Phillips.
So what's the story then?
You're telling me that.
You've conceded. You've conceded that.
I haven't conceded anything.
George Cottrell is an old friend of Nigel's. He's allowed to have friends, and that he supported him before he became a member of Parliament, doesn't do so now, what's the story? There is no story here. This is just yet another in a whole chain of smears that's trying to drag Nigel down. And we're sick of it. Let's talk about the things that people actually care about.
Well, let me tell you what they care about. Because I actually do spend a lot of time
do I. I can assure you, Trevor.
Being lectured by people on the buses and the tubes. And one of the things they will care about is seeing Britain's next Prime Minister in the company, day after day, of a man who has been convicted of money laundering. It's not a good look, is it?
He's an old friend of Nigel's.
No,
he has no role.
I don't care if he's an old friend. He's been convicted of money laundering.
He has no role within reform. There's no story here, Trevor.
What the next Prime Minister... Oh, really? You don't mind what our next Prime Minister... who our next Prime Minister hangs out with? You don't care about that.
Trevor, this is
People out there do.
Trevor.
That was Trevor Phillips giving Robert Jenrick a bit of a bollocking. Obviously, Robert Jenrick could have come back and pointed out that Trevor Phillips also has some friends who the public aren't particularly impressed by. He was best man at Peter Mandelson's wedding. Anyway, moving on. Even GB News gave Robert Jenrick a hard time.
So has George Cottrell funded Nigel Farage in the 12 months leading up to the 2024 election?
George is an old friend of Nigel's, and Nigel has good friends who've supported him over the years.
Did he fund him in that 12 months?
He gave him some support before he became a member of Parliament.
OK, so he funded him in the 12 months before. Now, according to the Code of Conduct, new MPs must register any benefit received during the 12 months prior to their election which exceeds £300 in value and is in any way related to their political activities. There's a note on the record of £9,200. But if he's been funding security, drivers, staff and accommodation, he's obviously given more money than that, hasn't he?
Well, not necessarily after he became a member of Parliament, because...
No, I'm saying in the 12 months before.
Well, the point here, the operative part of the rules that you just described is if this is in a purely personal capacity or not.
Well, it can't be, can it? It's security, drivers, staff to help him with his social media.
Yeah, when he was a GB News presenter, Camilla.
So it should be pointed out that while Farage was a GB News presenter, of course he's still a GB News presenter, he was also at that point in time the honorary president of Reform, so very much involved in politics still. And Jenrick appears intent, as he did across all his interviews on Sunday, on dodging the fact that all donations received in the 12-month period before becoming an MP must be declared. So he's saying it was after he was an MP, so it doesn't matter. Obviously, this register of interest says if it was in the 12 months before you became elected, it also matters for good reason, right? Because if someone is giving you loads of support, which then helps you get elected, that could easily be a situation where you feel like you owe them a favour. It's actually normally before an election that sort of the most aggressive fundraising happens. So that would presumably be one of the most important times to know who's been paying who. On ex-Reform MP Sarah Pochin had this to say: the establishment's attacks on Nigel Farage are becoming relentless. Just as predicted, large parts of the political and media establishment are petrified by Nigel's popularity and the success of Reform UK. They will seize on any story, however old, even those from known adversaries and rooted in past grievances, in an attempt to damage him. His MPs are behind him. His party is behind him, and increasingly, the country is behind him too. Now, Ash, it's interesting that Sarah Pochin says the country is behind him too, because it does look like, Reform is still ahead in the polls, although some of them are now saying that sort of with Burnham about to become Labour leader, they're looking a lot more neck and neck, Reform and Labour. But Farage's popularity is declining. Reform's polling is declining. Farage seems much less confident, much less open and much less available than he has done in the past. That last set of interviews he did was a complete disaster. I'm not sure if he's going to come and do a bunch of interviews about this Cottrell fellow. So do you think this is a real problem for Reform? Because, obviously the other option is just to say, well, everyone did this about Trump and no one cared.
Okay, so I suppose the first thing I'd say is that there is definitely something which is worth looking at. And I would include to this matter of, Cottrell's donations to Nigel Farage, the payment that Nigel Farage receives from gold companies to front these adverts to the tune of like hundreds of thousands of pounds. And these are adverts which nobody seems to watch. Now, it could be that these are gold companies with vast marketing budgets that they don't know how to spend particularly well. They made a bad bet on a very famous politician. That is possible. It's also possible that this is a way of funneling money to a politician in a way which just makes it past the register of interests, because you make it seem that it's for a form of paid work, advertising, but actually it's something much more like a political donation. And because it's coming through a company structure, there's less scrutiny of the individuals who are actually behind it. So I'll let you work out which one I think is most likely, and also you are free to make up your own minds. Could be a bad marketing bet, could be this other thing entirely. So I do think that there's a story there. But you look at how Farage is choosing to handle it. He's clearly anticipating a Burnham bounce. And he's not a fool. He'll look at the last two by-elections in this country, Makerfield and before that Gorton and Denton, which show that there is a very strong anti-reform vote. So the anti-reform vote in Gorton and Denton swung behind the Greens and Hannah Spencer. In Makerfield, the anti-reform vote swung behind Andy Burnham. Now, there are obviously things that can't be replicated in every single constituency. Makerfield was sort of unique in the sense that it was vote Labour to get rid of the current Labour Prime Minister. But that's something that Farage has to bear in mind. How does he deal with this period of time, which is likely to be something of an upswing for Andy Burnham? So I think what he's elected to do is to hide. Withdraw from the public eye for a bit, don't do loads of media, sit out a period of what he might calculate is going to be Andy Burnham's high watermark, and wait for support to keep ebbing. For Farage and his point of view, you hope that the salience of immigration never really goes down, that Andy Burnham's embrace of the fiscal rules and certain elements of the Labour manifesto promises from 2024 ties his hands a lot. And then we're back to, your regular scheduled broadcasting of Labour disappointment from which he is then able to benefit. The longer that there is between now and the next general election ultimately benefits Farage, I think. Burnham, in terms of what's being said in Labour circles, is said to be considering a general election in 12 to 18 months. So I think that what we're looking at here is a bit of a wait and hide game. And I think it's really in the gift of Andy Burnham to go, all right, when does he pull the trigger on a general election at the moment, which is most beneficial for him and least beneficial to his rivals on the right, as in Reform, and on the left, as in the Greens?
Now, there is a possibility that if Farage does get rebuked by the Parliamentary Standards organisation, then he could get suspended from Parliament for a certain number of days. And if that happens, then there is an opportunity for his constituents to sign a recall petition, which would mean that there would be a by-election. So he wouldn't be able to hide then because he'd have to fight the by-election. Of course, you could see that as an opportunity for him to regain momentum, because he'll be saying this is the establishment trying to bring me down. And it is he would be favourite to win that by-election, although it wouldn't be a walk in the park, but he'd be favourite to win it. And then maybe he could go back to Westminster a bit like Andy Burnham, saying I now have this mandate, I've gone against the odds. So that's a possibility. I suppose what I want to ask you about, Ash, though, sort of instead of speculating over Farage's future necessarily, is why is there this relationship between right-wing populists and Bitcoin, sort of gold? Trump, I think, is also sort of always ends up selling gold coins. He's very involved in Bitcoin. Bukele in El Salvador, very involved in Bitcoin. So I remember I was a bit more anarcho, sort of in the 2010s. There were lots of people on the libertarian left who were quite excited about Bitcoin because it was sort of separate from the state. I feel like now Bitcoin is very right-coded. Is that just because sort of libertarianism is much more right-coded than it once was? I suppose another argument is that, because we've had this debate a number of times on the show, sort of where people are saying, well, why are you calling Trump or Farage in any way outside of the establishment because they're so rich. Now, in many ways, they are part of the establishment. They are very rich. But it might be that they're turning to these industries because in sort of like the respected sort of managerial class, well-regulated industries don't really take kindly to the likes of Trump and Farage. And they are in this group of rich outsiders who have to invest in much more sort of unregulated kind of shifty spaces. I don't know, what are your thoughts about right-wing populism and Bitcoin and gold?
Well, I suppose the first thing is that I think you are right, which is that they are these sort of outsiders within the ruling class. So obviously they are not one of us. They are not a member of the global proletariat, but it's certainly the case that they can be targets for political debanking, for instance. So that gives you a pretty clear incentive to want to be able to keep some of your assets, keep some of your wealth in this sort of unregulated space away from legacy institutions and also the state. But there's a second thing, which is that these are also predatory forms of finance. I mean, crypto is, absolutely riddled with what are effectively like pump and dump schemes, meme coins, rug pulls, that kind of thing. Trump paying the UFC fighters in his own crypto coin, which is what happened, I think, last month in June, is a way of, one, funneling wealth to himself and his family in a way which is separate from political donations, right? So it's buy my coin rather than give me money personally. But then the second thing is that by sort of enveloping this layer of, sporting celebrity into it, is that then he creates an incentive for them to sort of bring their followers and their fans into it. I mean, there is just something in here which is incredibly extractive and incredibly predatory. And I think the third and final thing, and I know I sort of mentioned this already, is that layer of privacy, of a lack of regulatory oversight, again, means that you can take money from the kinds of people who would ordinarily want to donate to politicians because it's in their benefit to do so. But it's not going to be declared in the same way as on a registry of interest. By its nature, these are much more private, much more difficult to scrutinise transactions.
Yeah, and Farage, obviously he's not in government, so he can't change policy, but he did have a meeting with Andrew Bailey where I thought, where one of the big issues he brought up was crypto regulation. So like they aren't particularly subtle. Trump, of course, we sort of talked about this last week in his sort of financial filings. He's £2 billion richer since he became president, mainly because of crypto, people buying Trump coin and the like. Often that's sort of people who seem to be buying it maybe because they want influence, as Ash says. That's a way to donate without it being particularly transparent. Also, some of it is like his supporters sort of buying it and probably losing a bunch of money, which shows how much he respects them, how much he respects the people who actually get him elected. Ash, Sarkar, let's wrap up there. Fabulous show. Fantastic to have you here, to speak to you in my living room. What a privilege.
I was so happy just to be able to talk about football and to have sort of political cover to do so. I wish I could do that all the time.
Absolutely. We're all looking forward to the semi-final on Saturday. For now, that's it for us. Stay tuned for the rest of the week. As I say, we have some great interviews coming up for you. We can't 100% guarantee where we'll be hosting the show from each day, but we will try and keep the quality as high as possible. And we'll keep talking about the climate as well. I do think that it is a bit of a failing that we're having the most extraordinary weather sort of since records began, and that it's still not really at the top of the news agenda. We're going to try and change that. Of course, if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, if that's the kind of media organisation you want to support, you can go to novaramedia.com/support. As we keep saying, we'll be moving into a fully air-conditioned studio soon, which means that we will be able to guarantee a live show from our studio every weekday of the year. For now, thank you for watching the show. You've been watching Novara Media. Good night.